Robert Hayes was once one of Chicago's most brilliant architects. His designs, ranging from iconic skyscrapers to breathtaking minimalist structures, had made him a legend by the age of 35. But while the world admired his success, no one saw the emptiness he carried inside. 3 months ago, his father, the man who had inspired him the most, passed away suddenly. Since then, Robert had buried himself in work, turning his penthouse office at Hayes & Partners into a place of solitude. To the world, he was still a visionary, but within, he was a hollow man, exhausted and detached. That night, as Robert stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, staring down at the glowing city of Chicago, he had no idea that his life was about to change. And the person who would pull him out of the darkness was Natalie Pierce, a therapist specializing in trauma recovery. She wasn't there because he had asked for help. She was there because Claire Hayes, his younger sister, had decided that Robert could no longer keep running from his grief. The 50th floor of Hayes & Partners was silent at night, except for the glow of Robert's computer screen casting shadows across his sharp features. On his desk, blueprints for a new project lay scattered, but his tired eyes couldn't focus. The clock on the wall struck 10 p.m. Claire Hayes stepped into the office, carrying a paper bag, the same meal she brought every week, only to find it untouched each time. "You haven't eaten, have you?" Claire sighed, setting the bag down. Robert didn't turn around, his gaze fixed on the screen. "I have work to do." "You always have work." Claire's voice tensed. "It's been 3 months since Dad passed, and you're acting like nothing happened. You can't just bury yourself here forever." The mention of Dad made Robert pause. For a second, pain flickered in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with his usual coldness. "I'm fine." Claire stepped forward, pulling out a business card and placing it on his desk. "This is a therapist I scheduled for you, Natalie Pierce, trauma specialist." Robert shook his head, pushing the card back toward her. "I don't need therapy. I need time to work." Claire crossed her arms, her voice unwavering. "You have 2 choices. 1, you go to your appointment with Dr. Pierce tomorrow at 4 p.m., or 2, I call an emergency board meeting to let them decide if you're still fit to run this company." Robert turned sharply, his gaze icy, but Claire didn't back down. "I'm not joking, Robert. I won't stand by and watch you destroy yourself." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Robert picked up the business card, his eyes scanning the name printed on it. Natalie Pierce, Ph.D., Psychological Services. "Fine," his voice was dry, "but only once." Claire allowed herself a small, relieved smile. She knew he wouldn't accept help easily, but at least this was a start. Robert arrived at Natalie Pierce's office on time, but not because he wanted to be there. He hated feeling forced into anything, hated the idea of sitting in a stranger's office discussing things he had no interest in confronting. Natalie's office wasn't what he expected. It didn't feel clinical or impersonal like a hospital. Instead, it was warm, lined with soft-toned landscape paintings, dark wooden bookshelves, and a subtle scent of lavender. Natalie sat across from him, her expression calm. "Mr. Hayes, please have a seat." Robert stood still for a few moments before reluctantly settling into the chair, crossing his legs and folding his arms over his chest. "We have an hour," he said flatly. "Let's get this over with so I can get back to work." Natalie didn't react to his cold tone. She opened her notebook, placed a pen on top, and spoke evenly. "Let's start with why you're here." Robert smirked, leaning back. "I'm here because my sister threatened to have me removed from my company if I didn't come." Natalie nodded, unsurprised. "So you don't believe you need therapy?" Robert raised an eyebrow. "Do you think I do?" "You lost your father 3 months ago," Natalie said, her voice steady, free of pity. "Since then, you've buried yourself in work, distanced yourself from your family, skipped meals, and slept inconsistently. Is that what you call fine?" A muscle tensed in Robert's jaw, but he didn't answer. He turned toward the window, watching the Chicago skyline bathed in the golden hues of sunset. Natalie studied him for a moment before speaking again. "When you say you don't need therapy, does that mean you've actually faced your grief?" Robert turned back to her, his gray eyes sharp. "I don't have time to stop and grieve. If I do, I lose everything." Natalie gave a small nod. "Then let me ask you one last thing. Before your father passed, What did normal look like for you? Robert froze. Silence stretched between them. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but closed it again. Natalie didn't push. She simply set her pen down and regarded him with quiet patience. The session ended that way. Robert walked out without promising to return. But on his way back to the office, Natalie's question kept echoing in his mind. Before your father passed, what did normal look like for you? Late at night, the 50th floor of Hayes & Partners was silent, except for the dim glow of Robert's desk lamp. Blueprints stretched across his workspace, but his vision blurred as he stared at them. Absent-mindedly, his fingers reached into his desk drawer, searching for his favorite sketching pencil. Instead, they brushed against something small and cold. He pulled it out and froze. A pair of old reading glasses. His father's glasses. Robert's chest tightened. His father had always left them everywhere. In the car, on the kitchen counter, at the office. It used to annoy him, having to remind his father to keep track of them. But now he would give anything to return them just one more time. A sharp pressure built in his lungs. His breaths grew unsteady. The weight of guilt pressed down on him like a physical force. He pushed away from his desk, striding toward the window, inhaling deeply. The Chicago skyline glittered below, but it offered no comfort. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Claire. He let it go to voicemail. Robert scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over Natalie Pierce. A long pause. Then he locked the screen, gripping the phone tightly. He didn't need help, he just needed control. But that night, for the first time in 3 months, sleep refused to come. His father's voice echoed in his mind. Missed calls, broken promises, a last dinner invitation he never accepted. By dawn, Robert picked up his phone and typed a short message. I want to reschedule. Across the city, in a quiet apartment bathed in morning light, Natalie Pierce saw the notification. She stared at the screen for a moment before replying. Friday, 4 p.m., I'll be here. Robert read the message, then set his phone down. For the first time in 3 months, he felt like maybe, just maybe, this was something he needed. Robert parked in front of his childhood home. The afternoon sun cast warm light over the wooden porch, the same porch where he and Claire used to sit as kids. But today, it felt unfamiliar. He hadn't set foot here since the day they took his father to the hospital. Natalie stepped out of the car, standing beside him. She didn't speak, just waited. I don't know why I'm here. Robert's voice was rough. Natalie met his gaze, steady and patient. You're here because you're ready, even if you don't realize it yet. Slowly, Robert unlocked the door. The scent of aged wood and faint traces of coffee drifted in, carrying memories with them. A ceramic mug still sat on the living room table, his father's favorite. His steps were heavy as he moved toward his father's study. Everything was just as it had been. The bookshelves, the framed family photo, the sturdy oak desk. As if time had stopped. His fingers skimmed the desk surface before his eyes caught something on a nearby shelf. A porcelain eagle figurine. His chest clenched. His father had a tradition. Every time Robert completed a major project, he would buy an eagle figurine as a symbol of strength and achievement. But this one, he picked it up, realizing it was still in its original packaging. A small note was tucked inside, the handwriting instantly recognizable. For you when you finish your next project. I've always been proud of you. A sharp pain stabbed through his ribs, spreading like a fire he couldn't control. His fingers trembled as they traced the edges of the note, the familiar handwriting a ghost from a life that no longer existed. For months he had ignored his grief, convincing himself he was fine. But now, staring at a gift meant for a moment that would never come, the weight of everything crashed down like a collapsing building. His breath hitched, his vision blurred. Robert sank to his knees, clutching the figurine to his chest as if holding onto it could somehow bring his father back. A broken sob tore through him, raw and desperate. For the first time since his father's passing, he wept. Not in silence, not in restraint, but in the full force of a grief he had buried for too long. Natalie stood nearby, silent. She didn't offer words of comfort, didn't try to console him. She understood that this moment wasn't about fixing things. It was about allowing him to feel. And in that moment, in the quiet house filled with memories, Robert finally let himself grieve. Robert's therapy sessions were no longer filled with resistance. He stopped crossing his arms and staring out the window. He listened, he engaged. And, more terrifying than anything, he started looking forward to them. Natalie noticed the shift, not just in the way he spoke more openly, but in the way his gaze lingered on her just a little too long, in how he truly listened when she spoke. She knew this could become a problem. One afternoon, as the session wrapped up, Robert leaned back in his chair, watching her closely. "I used to hate coming here," he admitted. "Now, I find myself waiting for Fridays." Natalie's chest tightened. She set down her pen, her voice calm but firm. "Robert, I think it's time we stop." His expression darkened. "What do you mean?" "The boundaries between us are starting to blur," she said carefully. "I'm your therapist, and I can't continue if there are any feelings that go beyond a professional relationship." A heavy silence filled the room. Robert's grip on the armrest tightened. "So, you're rejecting me?" Natalie took a slow breath. "I'm doing what's right for both of us." Without another word, Robert stood, grabbed his coat, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. Natalie sat still for a long moment, an ache settling deep in her chest. She knew this was the right choice. So why did it hurt so much? Robert never returned to therapy. He didn't contact Natalie. For weeks, he threw himself into work, trying to regain a sense of control. But something had shifted. Work no longer gave him the solace it once had. Meetings, projects, none of it felt fulfilling. Eventually, he made a decision that surprised even himself. During a board meeting, Robert announced that he would step down temporarily from his role at Hazen Partners. He handed over most of the leadership responsibilities to Claire, who had quietly held the company together while he struggled with his grief. Claire stared at him in shock. "Are you sure?" Robert exhaled slowly, his fingers pressing into the polished wood of the conference table. "For the first time in my life, I don't know who I am without this job, and I need to find out." That night, standing in his empty penthouse, he realized that the silence no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a prison. Work had been his shield, his excuse, his escape. But now, it was time to face himself. A few weeks later, he left Chicago, traveling alone. In Japan, he spent hours wandering through Zen gardens, admiring minimalist architecture. He began learning how to slow down, how to exist without constantly proving his worth. Meanwhile, Natalie opened her own private practice. She continued her work helping others navigate grief, but this time, she also learned how to set boundaries for herself. They didn't speak, but even separated by miles, they still thought of each other. Not with regret, but with the quiet understanding that their story wasn't over. Just not yet. 3 months later, Robert returned to Chicago, not for the company, but for a special project, restoring a historic building into a mental health support center. He no longer cared only about skyscrapers. This time, he wanted to build something meaningful. And that's when he saw her. Natalie stood near the entrance, speaking with a group of mental health professionals. When she turned around, their eyes met. A brief moment of surprise, then Natalie smiled, not a polite smile, but a real one. "You're back," she said. Robert nodded, stepping closer. "And you're still here." They stood there, no rush, no pressure, just quiet understanding. "This center, is it your project?" Natalie asked. Robert glanced around, his expression thoughtful. "I wanted to create a place where people could find help, the way I once did." Natalie was silent for a moment. Then she nodded. This time they could begin again, not as therapist and patient, but as two people ready to step into a new chapter. Robert and Natalie sat across from each other in a small cafe, sunlight spilling through the windows. "How long are you staying this time?" Natalie asked, absently stirring her coffee. Robert studied her for a moment before a small smile appeared. "For good, but not as CEO." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Then what will you do?" He leaned back, glancing out at the mental health center he was helping restore. Build something meaningful. Help people who feel lost, the way I once did. Natalie was quiet for a moment before she nodded. Robert held her gaze. I want to do that. And I want to know if you're willing to walk this path with me. A slow breath. A brief hesitation. Then, Natalie smiled, this time with certainty. We take it slow, Robert. He nodded, his voice steady. Slow is fine, as long as we do it together. And this time, they chose each other, not because of fate, but because they were finally ready. 1 year later, Robert stood in the small garden behind the mental health center, carefully trimming the blooming rose bushes. The soft pink flowers, the color his mother once loved, flourished under the morning sun. I never pictured you as a gardener, Natalie's voice came from behind him. Robert turned, a gentle smile on his face. Turns out, it's a lot like architecture, just requires a little more patience. Natalie stepped beside him, admiring the roses in his hands. You've changed. Robert nodded, peace reflecting in his gaze. I've learned that sometimes the most valuable things aren't skyscrapers. They're the small things, the ones that need care every single day. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, flipping it open. Inside was a porcelain eagle figurine, just like the ones his father used to collect. For you, he said softly, a symbol of strength and a new beginning. Natalie looked at him for a long moment before smiling. Then let's start, Robert. This time, there was no rush. They were ready. 2 years later, Chicago was bathed in golden light as Robert and Natalie walked along the lakeside. A gentle breeze carried the scent of water, wrapping them in a quiet peace. Natalie squeezed Robert's hand, resting her head against his shoulder. You look nervous, she teased. Something on your mind? Robert stopped walking, turning to face her. In the soft glow of dusk, his gaze was steady, filled with emotions he had never spoken aloud. I used to think I could get through everything alone, he said, his voice low and warm. When my father died, I buried myself in work. I isolated myself. I thought if I just kept moving, the pain would eventually disappear. He took her hand in his touch gentle but certain. But then you came into my life. You stood by me in my loneliest moments. When I couldn't see a way out, you helped me face my grief, helped me find myself again. I don't know if I could have done it without you. Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, opening it. Inside sat a simple yet elegant ring, a single diamond catching the fading sunlight. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing for sure, Robert said, his voice full of quiet conviction. I want to face everything with you, every challenge, every moment. Natalie Pierce, will you marry me? Natalie's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Yes, Robert, 1,000 times yes. Robert laughed softly, sliding the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his embrace. And beneath the painted sky, they began a new chapter. This time, forever.